webinar series of Origin, the History Society. We are honored and grateful to our speaker, Professor Nayanjot Lahiri ma'am, for accepting our invitation for speaking on Ashoka, History and Memory. Nayanjot Lahiri ma'am is a great historian and archaeologist of ancient India. I am sure that everyone attending this webinar will be enriched with knowledge after completion of this webinar. We'll be running a live question and answer session at the end of the webinar. I welcome you all once again to the webinar and hope that you all will have a great time ahead. Now I would like to invite Manya Jha, a first year student from BA History Honors, to introduce our eminent guest. Over to you, Manya.
I think Manya needs to be unmuted.
Yeah, thank you. A researcher, historian, academician, and an archaeologist of ancient India, Professor Nayanjot Lahiri has been teaching at the University of Delhi and is currently at Ashoka University. Educated at St. Stephen's College, Delhi, and at the Department of History, University of Delhi. She taught at Hindu College from 1982 till 1993, and thereafter at the Department of History. She has served as the Dean of Colleges at the University of Delhi from 2007 till 2010, and as the Dean of International Relations from 2006 till 2007. She has been a member of Delhi Urban Art Commission from 2007 till 2010 and was also a Commonwealth Fellow Faculty in Oriental Studies in Cambridge. She currently serves on the Council of Indian Council of Social Science Research and on the Nehru Memorial Museum and Library Society, New Delhi. She was also affiliated with the committee set up by the Government of India in 2010 to analyze the impact of ancient monuments and archaeological sites and remains, amendment and validation ordinance, and to draft an alternative bill for the Parliament. The bill became a law in March 2010. Her research work was centered on ancient India, Indian archaeology, and heritage studies. She has authored many books, including Pre-Ahom Assam, The Archaeology of Indian Trade Routes up to 200 BCE, Finding Forgotten Cities, How the Indus Civilization was Discovered, Ashoka in Ancient India, Timepieces, a whistle-stop tour of Ancient India. She is also the co-author of Copper and its Alloys in Ancient India and an issue of World Archaeology entitled Archaeology of Hinduism. Her most recent book is Archaeology and Public Purpose, Writings on and by M.N. Deshpande. Her book Ashoka in Ancient India was awarded the 2016 John F. Richards Prize by the American Historical Association for the best book in South Asian history. She has been awarded the 2013 Infosys Prize in Humanities Archaeology for her exceptional commitment towards the integration of archaeological knowledge with the historical understanding of India from the earliest times. She is an exceptional scholar of proto-historic and early India. Her wide-ranging work on the past and present illuminates many aspects that incorporate contemporary Indian society. Your contribution to the field of history is insurmountable, and we are forever thankful to you, ma'am. Thank you.
Sorry for the inconvenience. Actually, there is some technical glitch with the Mihika's network. So, sir, please formally welcome ma'am and proceed with the session. Ashwini, sir.
Yes. Sorry. Professor Nayanjot Lahiri, friends, colleagues, and my dear students. I see great pleasure in introducing Professor Nayanjot Lahiri to this august gathering today. A specialist of archaeology and ancient history, Professor Lahiri received her early education at St. Stephen's College, Delhi, and thereafter earned her doctoral research degree from the Department of History, University of Delhi. She began her academic career from Hindu College, where she taught history from 1982 to 1993, and following that, she served as a professor of history in postgraduate Department of History at University of Delhi. While being a professor at the university, Professor Lahiri's academic responsibilities coincided with that of being in the lead of administratively important and extremely pivotal offices of Dean of International Relations as well as Dean of Colleges in between 2006 to 7 and 2007 to 2010 respectively. Apart from academic administrative responsibilities associated with the university, she has been a member of Delhi Urban Arts Commission as stated by the student just now between 2007 2010, and has also served on the councils of highly prestigious Indian Council of Social Sciences Research and Nehru Memorial Museum and Library respectively. Further, she has been a part of a committee set up by the Government of India in 2010 to analyze the impact of ancient monuments and archaeological sites and remains Amendment and Validation Ordinance 2010, which finally a bill got enacted into a law in March 2010. Currently, Professor Lahiri is a professor of history at Ashoka University. Professor Nayanjot Lahiri's research interests are wide and varied, including within its expansive encompass ancient India, Indian archaeology, regional history, religion, and heritage studies. She is the author of Pre-Ahom Assam, which was published in 1991, The Archaeology of Indian Trade Routes up to 200 BC, published in 1992, Finding Forgotten Cities, How the Indus Civilization was Discovered, published in 2005, Marshalling the Past, Ancient India and Modern Histories in 2012, and Ashoka in Ancient India, 2015. She is the author of Copper and Its Alloys in Ancient India, published in 1996, editor of The Decline and Fall of Indus Civilization, published in 2010, co-editor of Ancient India, New Research, published in 2009, The Buddhism in Asia, Revival and Reinvention, published in 2016, and an issue of World Archaeology entitled The Archaeology of Hinduism, published in 2004. Beyond these critical textual interventions, her writings have also appeared in consequential peer-reviewed journals like Antiquity, Journal of the Economic and Social History of the Orient, Indian Economic and Social History Review, World Archaeology and Economic and Political Weekly. Her more recent academic engagement has been with the History of Indian Archaeology since independence, published in the form of a book titled Monuments Matter, India's Archaeological Heritage Since Independence. In 2013, Professor Lahiri was a recipient of the highly coveted Infosys Prize given for impeccable scholarly contributions towards the advancement of knowledge in the domain of humanities and archaeology. Her book Ashoka in Ancient India was awarded the 2016 John F. Richards Prize by the American Historical Association for the best book in Southeast Asian history. In spring of 2017, Professor Lahiri was honored with being the O.P. Jindal Distinguished Lecturer at Center for Contemporary South Asia in Watson Institute of International and Public Affairs, Brown University, United States of America. Friends, today Professor Lahiri is amidst us to speak on Ashoka, history and memories. A king who, despite having his imperium spread over almost the whole of the subcontinent, never took upon the title of the emperor for himself, but kept on being referred to as Raja Magath or just the King of Magath. An act that can both be read as a statement of modesty as well as a testament of the august benevolent responsibilities that a ruler should take upon himself rather than be limited to truncated notions of one's imperiousness. Voice of Ashoka, coming from remote and mysterious distance of classical antiquity, through his timeless proclamations and edicts, speaks to us in ways more than singular. In our imagination, Ashoka was not merely a ruler, but is rather representative of the finer values of the human civilization endeavor, finding manifest in the notable and desirable ideas of moderation, empathy, tolerance, humanism, accommodation, and acceptance. Unfortunate though it is, in recent past, we are witness to an attempted narrative that is antithetical to the solemn, venerable, and hallowed values for which Ashoka has hitherto stood for in history. In words different, there has been a concentrated effort at problematizing, if not tarnishing, the grandeur and greatness of one of the greatest of our enlightening ideas and also the most enduring of the legacies of Indian history and civilization. It, in certain senses, seems that this effort against hitherto received wisdom is anything but historical, an objective and knowledge exercise. Why is it being done so, and in what ways is history being conflated with memory, in this exercise to produce a problematized, if not distorted, an image of this great monarch we have Professor Lahiri to educate and enlighten us about. So friends, now without taking much of your essential time, I invite Professor Nayanjot Lahiri to begin her much anticipated talk of today. Over to Professor Lahiri.
Thank you, Dr. Ashwini Shankar, and thank you, Mihika and Manya, for your very generous introductions. A big thank you to the large audience that is here of many friends, colleagues, and students. So I'm going to, before I begin, just share screen with you. Is this visible? Is this visible to you? Yeah, okay, great. So my lecture is on Ashok, history and memory. But before I get into the lecture, I just want to say that 9 days ago, much loved and respected historian of ancient India, who also happened to belong to the University of Delhi, Professor Bhairavi Sahu, passed away much before his time. Professor Sahu was a historian who wrote extensively on early medieval India, but also on some parts of ancient Orissa. And you know, a large part of that falls in Kalinga, that land that changed the career of the subject of this lecture, Ashok. I will always, of course, remember Bhairavi for his collegiality and for his camaraderie over the decades. And I really want to dedicate this lecture to his memory. Now, as I begin this lecture, a lecture on Ashok, who, as Ashwini put it, is certainly among the most admired and widely known emperors of ancient India and possibly the antique world. I want to just mention a couple of points about some words that figure in my lecture and in the title of my lecture, which is history, memory, and of course, connected to that is the past. Now, the first point I want to mention, and this is something that all of you are aware of, that history, when we think of it, we think of the past. History is about grasping the past through evidence, evidence that has survived. So you don't fabricate facts and actually what happened and what it might mean. But history is simultaneously a story. It involves interpretation. It involves placing those facts within a context or a narrative. So just by way of example, the pure fact is that Bhagat Singh was hung in Lahore on 23rd March 1931. But I think the brute fact of his hanging is of no interest to anyone if it is not put within a context, if it is not put within the situation relating to the nature of British power in India, to the opposition of many Indians to the British Empire. It is those elements which actually flesh out a bare fact. So history is not just about facts, it's equally about context, about interpretation. Which brings me to my second point, which is that history is actually different from the past. History is always an approximation of what happened in the past. If you think of the past is very much like the present. You can't grasp everything that happens around you. The present is chaotic, it is complex, it can be uncoordinated. And the same is true for the past. A great deal of the past has survived, but equally, a large amount of it has not survived. And history is actually a way of making sense of that mess, dealing with the missing pieces in this large jigsaw puzzle that we deal with, all of us who are career historians. So history is not the past, it is a representation of the past. And if I was to give you an example from Ashok, as you would know, we learn a great deal about how he wanted to appear in the public domain through his words. He puts forward a particular image of himself. But, if you think about his time period, there are many people besides Ashok. He's the most powerful man in ancient India in his time. But what about his subjects? How did they react to his ideas of governance or Dhamma or so much else that figures in his edicts? About such things we know very little. Those elements have actually not quite survived in the same way. So the point I'm trying to make is that in the past, people did react and respond to what Ashoka put out in the public domain. But while Ashoka's words have survived because they were inscribed in stone, the reactions of his subjects for all kinds of reasons are unknown to us. This brings me to the third point I want to make, which is the question of memory and how individuals and cultures are remembered. Now, many people believe that human memory is like a recorder. That is, the mind records events and then on cue, these are played out. But in fact, psychologists for more than a century have shown that memories are actually reconstructed. They are played back differently every time we recall them. So, instead of reproducing an original event or an individual, there is always a reconstruction that is based on the expectations that we currently have or the way we think. So what I'm going to try and show you with regard to Ashok is that I will, of course, talk about the historical Ashok, but also that as he's remembered across the centuries, and Ashok was never forgotten. This idea that Ashok was forgotten is totally wrong. The script in which his edicts were put down, that script, the knowledge of it faded, but Ashok figured in many other sources. So he is remembered across the centuries, but he's also reinvented. And earlier, I used to think that a person like Ashok is reinvented because we are dealing with somebody in antiquity. But now I realize that this is also true of the modern past. So if you think about Shahid Amin's work on Mahatma Gandhi, for instance, he shows how Gandhiji was selectively remembered even within his lifetime. He went to Gorakhpur, for example, gave this bhashan, and within a few weeks, the version of the lecture that he gave, the speech that he gave, was very different from what he had actually said. So popular imagination reworks what is said in the public domain, not just in ancient times, but even today. So there is, in other words, a historical remembrance pattern, which I will look at in relation to a Mauryan king, but this happens to be true for other individuals and for all periods of history. So now to move on to the historical Ashok. Ashok is not an entity who is known to us from, the sorts of source material that we have for other emperors. So when you think of Akbar, and if you want to know what he looked like, it's possible to do that, because there are all these, manuscripts, and there are all these miniature paintings where he is imaged. Similarly, if you think of the Gupta kings, there are coins which, have the portraits of the Gupta kings on them. But in the case of Emperor Ashok, his identity actually comes from his words. Words that, as you can see on this Allahabad pillar, it has a lot of other inscriptions, including the one here that you can see in beautiful calligraphy by Jahangir. But just above that, you can see, an Ashokan inscription. And these are inscribed on pillars, on rocks. And there are many, many such inscriptions. At least 50 places from where his inscriptions have been found. And there must have been many more such places. Now, when you think about 50 places, you say, oh my God, how much is known about this guy? And some of those inscriptions are very, very long. But as a matter of fact, when you start looking at the content of the inscriptions, you realize that it is only a partial recall of the life of Ashok, which is possible. Because Ashok, while he speaks a lot through his edicts, does not tell us anything about his years as a prince, his early period as a ruler, who his parents were, his father, not even his grandfather, and frankly, nor do any other contemporary records. So for instance, when you think about Ashok and the likely year of his birth, you have to work back from the date on which he was anointed as an emperor. And we have a broad idea that it would have been around 269, 268 BCE. So, Emperor Ashok anchors various things relating to his reign in relation to his consecration or his abhishek. And he actually starts talking about his ideas of governance, his metamorphosis, and so on and so forth, after the bloody Kalinga war. So it's his monumentally famous remorse, which actually results in writings that make him absolutely memorable. It is after Kalinga that you have rock surfaces and later pillars that come to be inscribed. And these have been found across India and beyond India, from Dhauli in Orissa to Girnar in the Junagadh area of Gujarat, and from Kandahar and also other places in Afghanistan to Yaraguddi and Rajula Mandagari and so on and so forth, from Andhra Pradesh. So, when you think about the sheer spread of these edicts, you realize that Ashok actually wanted his subjects not to think of him as somebody who was, a ruler in a faraway capital in Pataliputra, but someone very real on a rock near the paths where they lived, in places where they worshipped, and along routes that they traveled. Now, I doubt very much if Ashok traveled to all the places where his, words were put up, but I think it's quite amazing that here is an emperor who is a communicator par excellence. So he desired to communicate with people, and it's not just that he likes communicating, but he's also communicating with people in spaces that are a part of their own comfort zone. He's not actually engaging with them from privileged royal surroundings where he is located. And because he chose to speak in this way by putting up his words in all kinds of public places, that we know so much about the way he thought of his kingship, aspects of his personality, the extent of his empire, and the presence of, and the names even of a few rulers of his time. And also what is very interesting is he wanted his voice to appear as this, as a singular voice across his empire. So while at the local level things were changed and interventions are made by the local administration, I'm sure that the messages that were sent out were the same messages across a very large area. So if you think, for instance, of his first words, constituted by what are called his minor rock edicts. The minor rock edicts, let's say in Karnataka and Andhra and in parts of Madhya Pradesh and so on and so forth, the words are practically the same with some changes and some mistakes and some additions made by the local administration. Now, when you think about his words, I think one thing to me which is very appealing is that he is very keen to appear to posterity not as imperious, not as remote, but as a flesh and blood emperor. So his first message in the form of the minor rock edicts, and this is what you can see, for example, at Brahmagiri in Karnataka, they give a good sense of what he thinks is worthy of recounting to his subjects. He doesn't talk about taxes, for example, or about army conscription, the sorts of things that many rulers would have talked about, but he talks about the state of his mind. So it's not matters of the state, but the state of his mind that figures in his first words. He says he's become a Buddhist. He says his metamorphosis needs to be understood and emulated. And the message that he puts out in edicts like this is partly confessional and underlines that the new morality, that he's talking about, the Dhamma that he's talking about, is open and available to all, whether they are actually, the lowly or people who occupy the upper echelons of society. A little later, he records, and the Kalsi Rock is one place where he records this. He records the big war that he won at Kalinga, but he records it as a disaster where even though he was victorious in battle, he has lost because of the collateral damage that the people of Kalinga suffers. And he paints himself as the perpetrator of that violence. This is really quite mind-blowing because when you think of various rulers of history who win wars, they don't see themselves as defeated kings. They see themselves as, they are actually full of themselves and the campaigns that they have successfully, won. So when you think of images of the Oriental despot, often you will hear of Chinggis Khan and Timur and the Hunas and so on. And people think of Eastern monarchs as semi-savage warrior kings. But actually, there is also, a king like Emperor Ashok, who, is not associated with such things. He's associated with remorse. He's associated with an element of humility. And these are not virtues that you associate with a colossally successful male monarch in Asia. So I think in this respect, Ashok is utterly singular. And incidentally, this is what was recorded in the 1970s by a very famous sculptor of India, Meera Mukherjee. She made this huge sculpture, which is called Ashok at Kalinga. It's on the cover of my, Ashok in Ancient India. The massive state of the sculpture suggests the great power of the emperor. But if you look at his face, it is really anguished. There's a lot of angst there. And if you look at his sword, it is turned down. So, here is a sculptor who has actually used the 13th rock edict of Emperor Ashok to put forward how the emperor wants to appear after, winning the battle of Kalinga. Several years later, he appears again in a very human way. You find this inscription, it's called the Queen's Edict. You find this on the Allahabad pillar, and he's publicly acceding in this inscription to the desires of his queen, Karuwaki. Karuwaki has gifted mango groves, she's gifted gardens and almshouses, and she wants them registered in her name. So Queen Karuwaki is not a pushover. Now, what does the king do? She must have told the king this. He publicly informs his officers, and the registration is done as she desires. Now, again, I think for subjects of Ashok in his time, this is quite unlike anything that they were used to when they thought about the day-to-day reality of royal rule. So there have been kings many, many centuries before the time of the Maurya dynasty. But kings were not prone to confiding in their people about how they have been responsible for killing hundreds and thousands of people, or that they are publicly acceding to the desires of their queens. Now, apart from revealing himself in all too human terms, Ashok also elaborated on what appears, to me at least, to be very novel forms of governance and of personal conduct. Among his messages, and the one which matters the most to liberals, to Democrats, to secularists, and it no doubt sorely troubles majoritarians and religious fundamentalists, is addressed to all the sects of his day. He asks for a public culture in which every denomination honored every other. So this is the essence of Ashok's ideal of a public space, one that he derives from his version of Dhamma. The king also vested spiritual responsibility in his officers. So, apart from carrying out their routine duties, they were asked to actually preach Dhamma and to inspect every 5 years to see if his instructions were being followed. Emperor Ashok also undertook what are called Dhamma Yatras instead of pleasure tours. And during those Dhamma Yatras, he visited Shramans and Brahmins, he tells us. He made gifts to them. He visited the aged and he supported them with gold. In addition to this, Emperor Ashok actually mentions that he wants to be accessible at all times. So whether he is in the gardens, or he was dining, or he was in the haram, he says that his officers can come to him with urgent business whenever they want to come. I mean, I'm not sure this was done, but I think his subjects must have felt that here was a ruler who was interested in a prompt dispatch of business. And it indicates a new priority which was given to common public welfare. In later messages, and this is important because there's a lot of misunderstanding about this, Ashok actually grappled with the question of violence, of how state force should be used. So contrary to what many say, Ashok did not give up his army. He did not give up the coercive power of the state. All that he tried to do was to see how it could be mitigated. So on the question of handing out harsh punishments, he ordered, especially for those who were on death row, he ordered 3 days, when condemned prisoners, from the time when they were handed over the sentence to the time when they face the gallows to actually get their affairs in order. So this, these 3 days were to allow the relatives of prisoners to appeal against the death sentence, and also to allow prisoners to have a more dignified death, because he says the condemned man should be able to prepare himself by fasting or by bestowing gifts. And Ashok also mentioned that on as many as 25 occasions, from the time of his consecration, he released prisoners. And some of them may conceivably have been commutations. So Ashok did not give up state force. But I think, as one would imagine, a sensitive ruler would, he tries to grapple with this idea that how can I mitigate state violence against people. It's not just people. Ashok also tried to mitigate violence against other living beings. So there are a slew of, injunctions against the killing of animals, of birds, of fish. And I think this is really an exceptional dimension to his provisions. In fact, from the modern ecological perspective, Ashok's 5th pillar edict is without doubt the most copious religious message anywhere in the ancient world for the protection of living beings. In his major rock edicts, he had already begun talking about this. He had talked about, for example, the fact that the slaughter of animals in the royal kitchen had been drastically reduced. He spoke about veterinary hospices being established, and so on and so forth. But in this 5th pillar edict, he takes it to an entirely new level. So he's ordering his people not to kill pregnant and lactating she-goats and sows. He's regulating animal castration. He is, asking that cocks should not be castrated, that the husks containing living animals must not be burnt, that forests should not be uselessly razed for destroying living beings. I mean, if you think of all this, today also there's a protection of various, animal species, but we are doing it because those species are becoming scarce. Emperor Ashok is also protecting, there's species protection here, but he is doing it out of compassion that these are living beings and we must try to mitigate their suffering. So, if you think about this, it's an extraordinary, it's a staggering kind of public intervention. It's a fundamentally new notion of a social and political community. His community is not just his people, it's other living beings. I'm not suggesting that this happened. People continued to enjoy their meat, right? States can never succeed in moderating or changing the dietary habits of their people. But if you look at his words and try to understand what is it that he's trying to do, it's coming out of this compassion for living beings other than human beings. So this is one part of the historical Ashok, which is, an exceptionally new kind of governance order. These are his ideas. I'm not sure all of this was translated into practice. But there is also another Ashok, another avatar in his inscriptions, and that is Emperor Ashok as a Buddhist ruler. I'm specially mentioning this because the governance ideas of Ashok get forgotten, but Emperor Ashok, as he presents himself as a Buddhist ruler, that is an element which continued to be remembered across the centuries. So what are we talking about? For example, if you think about the pilgrimages that Emperor Ashok undertook, his pilgrimages were all to Buddhist places, including, as you can see here, the birthplace of the Buddha, Lumbini. This is the, it's a new building. It's the Maya Devi temple. And you can see here the pillar of Emperor Ashok by the side. And you can also see here various, the remains of stupas, monasteries, and so on and so forth. And this is a closer view of the Lumbini Pillar and of the Lumbini Pillar inscription. Here, Ashok recorded that he had come here to pay obeisance to the place where, the Sakyamuni was born. And he, of course, announced a reduction in taxes. He's like any other ruler. Even our rulers today, whenever they go anywhere, they will put up a plaque and mention their own names, along with the place where they are. And this is what Ashok does as well. But he also does certain other things. So at Sanchi, also, and this is the, what remains of the Ashokan Pillar in situ. But apart from Sanchi, also at Sarnath and at Koshambi. And you can see the words here where the cursor is, even though they are not very clear. Ashok presented himself as a spiritual regulator and a protector of Buddhist unity, somebody who opposed divisions among monks and nuns, or what is called Sangha Bheda. So, all this takes you beyond Ashok as being just a Buddhist. He actually, and somebody who is going for pilgrimages to various Buddhist places, he's actually sounding like a very senior member of the Buddhist clergy. He's talking about punishing dissidents who, are trying to break up the Sangha. And he says he's going to punish them by forcing them to, give up their monastic robes and take on the white clothes of a householder. So here is a monarch speaking in a very imperious way to the Sangha, telling them that, look, breaking up the Sangha into, these smaller factions is just not on. We have to work for the unity of the Sangha. And then, of course, you have Bherat, not far. It's just a half an hour's drive from the main highway that takes you to Jaipur, half an hour, literally. And here at Bherat, in what is called the Calcutta Bherat Edict, it used to be under this wonderful rock that you can see, but it was taken away to Calcutta in British times. And, here he says that, the Buddha spoke very often on all kinds of subjects, and he mentioned the texts of the Buddha. And then he says that of all those religious expositions, I am saying these are the ones. And he specifies a few which the monastic community, needs to absorb. These are the ones that they need to hear. Now, the confidence with which Ashok suggested this, and, the focus that he is giving to listening and reflecting on doctrinal messages makes it seem as if Ashok is presenting himself to, to the Buddhists as a kind of preacher successor of the Buddha. I'm sure nobody else, believed that, but that's how he presents himself. Ashok, actually, if you look at his edicts, he was obsessed with, his own ideas, and he dreaded their disappearance. So he's constantly talking about the future, about the fact that his sons and grandsons and all the generations coming till the destruction of the world must continue his acts of merit and must continue with Dhamma. And, if you read all of this, you feel that this is a guy who has some nervousness about his own legacy. So he's not just talking about what he's done, he's saying, look, in the future too, this must be done. Which, of course, brings me to the question of how then did Ashok think of the past? We know what he thought of the present and then of the future. But how did he think of the past? Now, the past features in Ashok's words most often when he talks about the consequences of Dhamma or the new morality that he is promoting. And he mentions this, on a number of occasions. So when he talks, the first message that I mentioned to you, when he talks about him becoming a Buddhist, there is a long memory that he displays when he says that in preceding times, humans and gods were not mingled, but now, and he takes the credit for them, they are being intermingled. He then invokes the immediate past when he says that though he had become a lay Buddhist worshipper 2.5 years ago, it was only about a year or so before that he became zealous on account of his interaction with the Buddhist Sangha. So, in other words, the past state of his kingdom and the past state of his own rulership are invoked to, emphasize his own transformation. This juxtaposition of a progressive present and memories of, a less edifying past are even more clear in the major rock edicts. So he says that, many hundreds of, and thousands of living beings were formerly slaughtered in the royal kitchen, and now only 3 are slaughtered. He talks about the fact that for many hundreds of years, there's been a slaughter of lives, cruelty to living creatures, disrespect to Shramans and Brahmins. But now, thanks to his own efforts, and it's to a degree that was not possible, he says, till the present. You now have absence of cruelty to living creatures, seemly behavior to Shramans and Brahmins, obedience to parents, obedience to the aged, and so on. And then he says, where war drums had once sounded, there was now the sound of morality. Bheri ghoso, aho dhamma ghoso. So while in the past you have martial music, which accompanied military, campaigns, the beating of the bheri is actually a call to arms. Now you only have the sound of Dhamma being proclaimed. Now, governance is actually described by him even in relation to Kalinga in this way. Kalinga is remembered by him that, look, in some years ago, in the 8th year following my consecration, I conquered Kalinga, but it had all kinds of destructive consequences. But he's mentioning this past in order to tell the Atavikas, the forest dwellers, that please follow my example. You should also repent as I have, so that you will be spared injury. So he's actually putting out a threat, but he's doing it in the language of cajolery. Now, Ashok, can you just give me a minute? I just, I have a very young granddaughter, so I just want to, she's crying away. I'll just go and tell her that I'm giving this lecture. दादू को ऊपर ले जाओ प्लीज अभी 15 मिनट बाद लाना मुझे काम करना I'm really so sorry, but this is a part of life. This is a joint family, where we live, and she's a young baby. Okay. So, he is putting out this threat in the language of cajolery, but there are lots of things he doesn't remember or doesn't want to remember. Ashok did not completely remember how he came to the throne. He was not the eldest son of his father, and he must have killed off a few of his brothers to actually, take over, capture, the throne of Magath. He does not mention the names of past kings. So, the fact that he's talking about kings hundreds of years ago, he doesn't tell us who these kings actually are. So, Ashok has this ability, as you will see, and this is true for later times, to recast his own past by remembering it in a particular way. And I think he would not have been surprised with the skillful and selective way in which he was portrayed in later centuries. Now, after his death, let's see what happened. So, for example, we know that Buddhism continued to prosper, and it continued to prosper, for example, in places like Sanchi. Sanchi is one place where Ashok was memorialized. So how is the memorialization happening? So, sorry, excuse me, just a minute. Yeah, so on the one hand, if you look at the 2nd century BC sculptures, and these are shortly after, the Maurya dynasty, is supplanted by the Shungas, you have many representations at Sanchi of the Sarnath pillar. Now, there's a pillar at Sanchi, but the sculptors there don't use Ashok's pillar. They actually show, the Sarnath pillar. And as you can see, it is being worshipped. And this is interesting because, the Sarnath pillar is a symbol of the Buddha. So I'm not sure whether it is Ashok who's being, remembered here, or whether it is, the Buddha. Then there are representations where Ashok himself figures. This king on the chariot, this is Emperor Ashok. This is on the southern gateway. And this represents Ashok's visit to the Ramgram Stoop. He goes there to try to take possession of some of the original relics of the Buddha. And you can see Nagas on the other side of the stupa. And they actually successfully resist him. Then on the southern gateway, on the western pillar of the southern gateway, again, you have Emperor Ashok shown grief-stricken because he's heard that the Bodhi tree is dying. And he's accompanied by his queen. And it's really, as you can see, both at Ramgram and with reference to Mahabodhi, it is his Buddhist persona which is imaged. So, if you then think about the fact that earlier I had shown you a pillar where Ashok is appearing as being very, very imperious towards the Sangha. Now, the Sangha has taken revenge because what the Sangha has done is that they have shown Emperor Ashok in his, in unsuccessful contexts. So he tries to get the relics from Ramagram. He doesn't get them. He gets relics from many other places, but that is not what is shown at Sanchi. And similarly here, it's his ignorant queen who has almost got the, Bodhi tree killed off. And that is what gets represented. So it's not the imperious emperor, which is the historical Ashok of Sanchi, who's talking to the Sangha and telling them what to do. It's the other Ashok who is actually as human as many others have been. So, of course, in the case of Sanchi, Ashok himself had a presence there. So we can talk about how his afterlife is imaged and how different it is from the historical time of Ashok. But what about places where Ashok actually had no connections with? So I'm thinking, for example, of Myanmar. And I'll begin with Bagan. It's very interesting because if you think of East Asia and Southeast Asia, actually, those regions don't figure in Ashok's edicts. It's rulers towards the west, states towards the west, which are figuring. But he's most frequently remembered across the centuries and continuously remembered in Southeast and East Asia. Now, in Bagan, in the medieval period, in one temple, you find representations of Ashok. So this is the Minkaba Govaki temple, which was built by Rajkumar, a prince who was the son of Kyanzita, a ruler of the 12th century. This temple has elaborately painted interiors. And in these interiors, you have all kinds of things, including the life of the Buddha and the Jatak tales, which are imaged, but you have multiple representations of Emperor Ashok. So when I first saw them, I felt very thrilled. I said, well, look at the Indian connection. But actually, when you look at the representations carefully, of course, this is an Indian emperor, but the representations are entirely according to a Sri Lankan text, which is the Mahavansa. So just to show you two representations, this is from the Third Buddhist Council. The monk that you see in the middle is Mogaliputta Tissa, and at the bottom, the fourth ruler is Emperor Ashok. And we know this because there are inscriptions with each of these panels. And here, Emperor Ashok is telling Mogaliputta Tissa that he must, he must try to persuade the monks to observe the Uposatha festival. This is another representation, again Mogaliputta Tissa here, and this is Emperor Ashok. You can see the crown, slightly portly figure that you have. And here it is Mogaliputta showing him, certain miracles. That is what is being shown. And these are all representations, and even the others, which I haven't shown you, are really from the Mahavansa. So how do you imagine these frescoes? I mean, of course, the remembrance and what you have in the Mahavansa is clearly associated with Buddhism, but it is Buddhism plus something else. And if you were to ask yourselves that why is Rajkumar actually putting up all these representations in which Emperor Ashok and many others figure, you realize that Rajkumar is a prince who will never be the king. His father, Kyanzita, had actually got to claim the throne because of the support of the Mon state. And he had promised that the offspring of his daughter, who was married to a Mon prince, would succeed him. So Rajkumar was completely aware that he would never become king, but he was a remarkable scholar. He had mastered the full range of Theravada literature, cosmology, and history. And what he does is he uses this temple that he builds to actually show his knowledge very spectacularly and clearly in this temple. And that is why Ashok figures here. So Rajkumar, if you look at all the panels very carefully, he does what others today do vis-a-vis texts. So you would think, well, this is a faithful representation of the Mahavansa. Actually, it is not. He drops parts of the Mahavansa that he doesn't find interesting, and he adds bits which are far more personal. So, he brings the narrative up to the time of the king, Anaratha, who his father, Kyanzita, had served as a general. And he also shows a representation here. There's a panel which shows the Sinhalese king, who was a friend of Anaratha, Vijaybahu, who had just died around the time the temple was being made. But in any case, the point I'm trying to make is that Rajkumar makes his own knowledge, and mastery of the texts explicit. So Ashok is remembered, but actually what is far more interesting is not the remembrance of Ashok, but that it is a king of Myanmar who has actually imaged Ashok and so much else, because a prince, he's trying to do this because he's never going to be king, but he wants to put himself out in the public domain as a very remarkable and wise Buddhist scholar. So very quickly, to just show you a couple of other slides from Myanmar. This is from Mandalay. This is the Mahamuni Temple, the most sacred temple of Mandalay. And in the corridors of this temple, there are a lot of painted representations, including one of Ashok. So this is Ashok taking out the southern branch of the Bodhi tree, which is to go with Sanghamitta to Sri Lanka. That is what is mentioned in both the Deepavansa and the Mahavansa. Now, this is a 19th century representation. So the Mahavansa remains popular from the 11th, 12th centuries in Myanmar right till modern times. And most interesting is the fact that there's a building in the Mahamuni Temple where you have copies of inscriptions. And in these inscriptions, many of them, they talk about the kings of Bagan, the ones I've mentioned, Anavrata, Kyanzita, Situ, another king, who have set up stupas. And those kings always mention that they are repairing and restoring the stupas that were originally created by Ashok. And these are all in Myanmar. Now, the fact of the matter is that Ashok did not even mention Myanmar, and it is most unlikely that he put up stupas there. But these are kings who want to create a very distinguished genealogy for themselves. A genealogy which goes back to the most well-known and powerful Buddhist king of India. And this is what is done by them. They invoke him by saying that he built these stupas, we are restoring and repairing them. And they're saying this in the medieval period. Now, I asked myself the question, and this is what I just want to say in conclusion, that, what about Buddhist kings in India? So you have Buddhist kings, many, many Buddhist kings. You have the Kushan rulers of the northwest. You have Pala rulers in the east. You have the Bhaumakaras in Odisha. You have the Maitrakas of Gujarat. But nowhere do you find them remembering Ashok. So the memory of Ashok does not figure among the Buddhist rulers of India. It figures in the Buddhist rulers elsewhere, in Sri Lanka, Myanmar, China, Thailand. My new book on Ashok, which is coming out, has chapters on all this. So if you have to ask yourself that which ruler of India actually memorialized Ashok, the Indian ruler who actually did a very serious, proper, and expansive memorialization of Ashok was Jawaharlal Nehru. It is he who invoked Ashok on crucial public occasions. He was instrumental in placing the Ashokan Wheel on the Indian flag. He also presided over a ceremony, and you can see a photograph from there, when the Buddhist relics of Sanchi, some of them were brought back from England. And it's no wonder, you can see standing near, this is Nehru, but standing near him, this figure in a lungi is Uno, who was the Prime Minister of Myanmar. And Uno, in his autobiography, says that Nehru was really a reincarnation of Ashok. He specifically mentions this. But there's just one point I want to mention about Nehru. So if you look at the debate, when he talks about the Ashokan Wheel in the Indian flag, he says this is something all of us have seen on the top of the capital of the Ashokan column. But actually the wheel on the Sarnath pillar had not been seen either by Nehru or by any other Indian, for the reason that the wheel was never recovered. Only 3 or 4 small pieces of the wheel were found. And that's why, it's a selective remembrance again. He's saying that everybody has seen the wheel, but actually the wheel was broken. And it was broken, the whole wheel had not survived at all. And that's why it could not ever be restored. So, but I think the interesting thing is that Nehru converts this wheel, which is a symbol of Buddhism, in the Sarnath pillar of Ashok, into a symbol of Indian civilization. And a little later, a historian, a very well-known historian of India, Vasudev Sharan Agrawal, wrote a book where he showed that actually the wheel was the fruit of a number of religious, philosophical, and cult motives, and that it was part of the accumulated tradition of Indian people. So what was a Buddhist symbol became a symbol, and Vasudev Sharan Agrawal does it very well. He shows the importance of the wheel in all kinds of Indian traditions. But the point I'm trying to make is that it is with such dramatic appropriations of antiquity that identities of nation states are imagined and forged. And all this, I think, shows how public memory is given shape. It is given shape by changing, by reimagining, by distorting, and reshaping history. Thank you. I'm just going to end this and stop sharing. I'm really sorry, but I just have time maybe for a question or so, because I have to, I have to reach somewhere at 1:10.
शैलेंद्र मोहन जो आप अनम्यूट करिए अपने आप को.
Increase the volume, Shailendra Mohan. Can't hear you.
He's muted, भाई. उसको unmute करो.
Sir, he is mute.
Can't hear you.
ये आवाज आ रही है. Any other question? कोई है?
Ashwini, I'll be quite happy to come back for a question answer session at some point on Ashok. Yeah.
Okay. Vikas, I request my colleagues to turn on your camera. Sumrita, kindly propose your vote of thanks.
Yeah. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah. Professor Lahiri, this has been a most invigorating lecture. It sets us thinking in so many directions that I know that as teachers in the classroom, we will be taking up so many issues that you have brought to light today. And a big thank you to you for coming. And I know you are in a hurry, but I just want to take a minute to just bring our attention of our students to two things that Professor Lahiri has so beautifully brought out for our consideration. One, of course, Ashoka, his legacy. And the second is how history is constructed, how history is not past, how past is way more and beyond history, but how we construct a past through selective memory or through focusing on what is available to us. And here, I do want to tell our students, because there are many third-year students here, that there has been an extremely beautiful piece that she wrote about creating a memory of the revolt of 1857. What is remembered, from what point of view, you will find a beautiful way in which memorializing through pillars, through edicts, through stupas, and through other, architectural form. Here we know that very close to Delhi University, we have what is known as the pillar in the name of in the memory of revolt of 1857. But what is remembered is the names of the European, English, soldiers who gave their life for the empire. Very different from how we would like to remember and think of the revolt of 1857. I'm just bringing this because I want to say that Professor Lahiri's work goes way beyond. To research on Ashoka itself is a very big task, and she's making so many linkages. As we know, even her new book is bringing new linkages. But I think she is also become, in a way, a guide to us in possibilities of thinking about history as a subject, as a discipline, as a way of remembering, thinking of past and what we want to focus on. Once again, Professor Lahiri, a very big thanks to you. I also want to thank our department, which has been holding this seminar series. In a way, I know that many people ring up and say, who is the next speaker now? And they look forward to it. I want to thank our principal who has been giving us this opportunity and space to hold this series. And above all, our students who have been the pillar of strength for us and motivating force behind this. And Professor Lahiri, we have to have you again for a question answer session. Thank you all.
Absolutely.
Vikas, just take the pic. I request my colleagues to turn on your cameras. Thank you, Professor Lahiri. Thank you.
Very much for inviting me. And I'm really so sorry I have to rush off, but I promise you I will come again. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you. अच्छा भाई
अच्छा हो गया
तो मैं इसको लाइव
सर